Today, we're going to cover one of the most common questions asked of doctors, I believe, which is, why can't I lose weight? And this specific video is going to discuss where to look when nutrition and exercise are not enough. Because, nutrition and exercise are pretty intuitive if someone's put on weight and or can't lose weight, but they're not exercising and they haven't cleaned up their diet, and those are the two most logical places to start. And so in this video, we're going to discuss what do you do if you're doing those things and in your opinion, you're nailing those things correctly for you. Where do we go from there? One way I like to describe it is that nutrition and exercise are the low-hanging fruit. They are things that must be done if you want to lose weight, must be done correctly and consistently. But if they are not enough, then you could say it two ways. There's a deeper cause, there's a root cause that isn't being found. Or if you've got a picture of a tree without the root showing, you could say there's root higher up the tree metabolically that has not been discovered. Either way, if nutrition and exercise aren't getting you where you want to go, we have to look for a deeper cause. And so that's what we want to talk about today. But first, I want to discuss a case that is in my book in chapter 9, and it's the case of Kendra. And if you haven't seen my book, it's available on Amazon as an ebook, as a paperback, as a hardcover, or as an audiobook, and can be found on Audible. Or if you like to listen to it, you can download a free audio version of my book at www.functionalmedicinecharlotte.com/free. So check that out if you're interested. But in chapter 9, I talk about Kendra's story, and the title of chapter 9 is "There Is No Perfect Diet." And every diet has a diet guru, and every diet has adherents that are quite zealous in support of that diet, because that diet has changed many people's lives, and that's good. But the point of the chapter is that there is no perfect diet, and even within an individual, the perfect diet for me today might not be the perfect diet for me 2 years ago or 2 years from now. So we want to understand our current physiology, our current lifestyle, the factors involved, our current puzzle, to understand what is the best, or what are the best nutritional strategies to implement right now to help us achieve whatever our goal is. In Kendra's case, her goal was to lose weight. And so I'll spoil chapter 9 a little bit for you and say that Kendra presented to me in tears. She was crying because she couldn't lose weight despite having just done a 3-month keto challenge where she, quote, did it perfectly, but my husband, that a-hole, cheated and he lost 25 pounds, unquote. And this is a common finding too in couples. It's like men lose weight easily, the women struggle, and the women are actually more disciplined than the men oftentimes. And so that was also Kendra's story. She had nailed keto for 90 days, hadn't lost a pound, and at the same time, she'd also done or gone to boot camp workouts 5 times a week. And so by all accounts, she was nailing the nutrition and the exercise, but she still wasn't losing weight. So what gives, right? And so this is a story of, she had other things metabolically going on, and I'll have you read the book to go figure out what those were. But relevant to our conversation is the part about, she was doing a diet that most people would agree is healthy, or healthy at, for a short time, or healthy for someone to lose weight, which is a ketogenic diet. She did it for 90 days and she nailed it. And so again, if we surveyed many people, we'd probably get the majority saying, yeah, that's healthy, that's good for her. But in her case, that was not the best diet for her. It was working against her. And so when we changed her diet to a different diet that fit her based on what her testing showed mattered in her case, she ends up losing 30 plus pounds. And so in her case, she was doing the diet wrong, even though it was perceived as right. And also in her case, the 5 times a week at boot camp ended up being overtraining for her. And so even though we could survey everyone on the street and ask them, is exercise healthy? Or is it healthy to go to a boot camp class? Most people, if not all, would say yes. There are situations where a boot camp class, a high intensity exercise class like that may be unhealthy for an individual and may be overtraining. And if you're overtraining, that's raising cortisol levels, and cortisol levels will deposit fat centripetally or around your waist and midsection, work against your weight loss goals. So if you're interested in hearing more about Kendra's story and the details there, check out chapter 9 in the book. We're going to move beyond the nutrition and diet piece, the nutrition exercise piece now into the deeper causes of, if you are nailing those two things, why might you still not be losing weight? So let's jump over to the whiteboard for that. So you get the idea. We've got a fruit tree here, and the fruit, call them apples. Fruit is the low-hanging stuff. The fruit represents the diet and nutrition strategies that people implement to try and lose weight. And when they go and pick these off the tree, oftentimes people lose weight and they do great, and they don't need to look further. But there are people who do these things and still don't lose weight, and those are the people we're talking to today. And so where do you go from here? And where you want to go is you want to look deeper. You want to look for root causes. And so, root cause in this scenario is talking about the roots. So if we go beneath the ground, what a tree looks like. They've got roots reaching deep underground. And the tree may be high above ground, but without a healthy root system, it's not going to be a healthy tree. And the roots are what are pulling nutrients and water out of the soil to serve this large thing above ground. And so if we're looking underground or deeper for causes, we need to consider things like the thyroid. Okay, if you're exercising and eating right, theoretically, and we'll assume you're eating right, and you're still not losing weight, then one deeper cause we want to look at is the thyroid. Why might the thyroid matter? Well, because the thyroid sets the metabolic rate. It's easier to write that way. Thyroid sets your metabolism for every cell in your body. So to lose weight, you have to have a metabolism. And if your thyroid is dinged for whatever reason, maybe you lack iodine and selenium and vitamin A, or maybe you've got antibodies to your thyroid, which would cause Hashimoto's disease, or Graves' disease if it's hyperthyroid. But hyperthyroid has difficulty keeping weight on. So Hashimoto's would drive difficulty losing weight. Or maybe you've got too many environmental toxins that are endocrine disruptors messing up thyroid function. There's multiple reasons why thyroid may be subpar, and you want to figure those out if they're there. You want to test for the thyroid, because without a metabolism, it's hard to lose weight. And it's very common. Thyroid dysfunction is very common in our society. So that is one place to look. Another place you want to look will be in the gut, in gut health. Why? Well, because the gut contains up to 80% of the immune system. And if the gut is a mess, then the immune system is chronically triggered, and that triggers chronic inflammation. And inflammation, on a very simple level, inflammation causes, part of inflammation is fluid edema, swelling. And so if you have systemic inflammation that started in the gut, then you have systemic swelling as a way to look at it, or you're holding water. And so oftentimes I've seen in my practice, people who are systemically inflamed, if you decrease the inflammation, oftentimes they can lose, 8 to 12 pounds quickly, depending on how inflamed they are and how much that inflammation is contributing to them being overweight. So looking at the gut is a key piece for that reason. Another reason looking at the gut is important is because the gut is where you're assimilating the nutrition or the food that you're eating, right? So if you can't assimilate the food, which is digest it and absorb it, then you could be eating the best organic, non-GMO, high quality diet in the world. And all that ends up being for you is expensive feces because you didn't absorb any of it. And if you didn't absorb, I mean, you absorb some of it, I'm sure, but if you don't absorb enough of it, then you are lacking the nutrients that you need to act as the foundational building blocks or raw materials for you to create new tissue and for you to have healthy physiology and a healthy metabolism in order to lose weight. So the gut is a common place to look. You could also look at blood sugar. If your blood sugar regulation is off and you've got issues with insulin sensitivity, then rather than storing that or not storing it, but rather than insulin driving that glucose into the cell for energy to your body, okay, it will drive it, it'll convert it to triglycerides and store it as fat. So now your sugars turn to fat and it's working against your weight loss goals. So blood sugar regulation is a fundamental physiologic process that must be optimized and well regulated, or else all kinds of unhealthy dominoes fall for us metabolically. So poor insulin sensitivity, or another way to say it is having insulin resistance, impacts your cholesterol panel, your triglyceride levels, your inflammatory status, your energy levels, your cognition, all of that. And it also increases risk for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and for dementia. So we'll draw a brain right there. Okay, I'll write dementia because that doesn't really look like a brain. So insulin regulation is key. And insulin also can spill over into hormones, other hormones. So when we say hormones just like that, most people mean sex hormones. And so the insulin connection is if you have insulin surges, then your sex hormones get knocked, okay? And if it's a male, an insulin surge leads to increased estrogen levels potentially in a male via increased aromatization of testosterone to estrogen. And so that in a male leads to, maybe breast development or fat deposition around the waist, maybe lack of motivation, low libido, crying at Hallmark commercials, things like that. Insulin surges in a female. So for female, insulin surges increase androgens. So that's things like testosterone and DHT and other players down that pathway, and that promotes PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And polycystic ovarian syndrome commonly involves weight gain, again, for reasons associated with insulin surges and poor blood sugar regulation. So sex hormone dysfunction can be a key player in the inability to lose weight. And even deeper, oftentimes, than the sex hormones is insulin surges or insulin resistance that impacts cortisol and is a stressor. And when you increase cortisol, cortisol deposits weight around the midsection, like we said earlier, when discussing Kendra's overtraining and exercising too much increased cortisol for her, which leads to fat deposition around the waist. And if you have high cortisol for too long, it may tip over into low cortisol. And low cortisol is pro-inflammatory because you're lacking cortisol, and cortisol is an anti-inflammatory, right? If you have pain, you go get a corticosteroid injection in your shoulder or your knee or your hip, because corticosteroids, cortisol is one of them, is a powerful anti-inflammatory. But if your cortisol is too high for too long, you can become cortisol resistant. And so the body stops listening to the message, the knock on the door of cortisol, just like it stops listening to the knock on the door from insulin if you're insulin resistant. And so a lack of cortisol, cortisol is anti-inflammatory. If you lack it, that's a pro-inflammatory result, right? Losing the positive is a negative, right? So low cortisol levels are pro-inflammatory because you're lacking one of your best fire extinguishers. And if you get to the point where, either way, if you have high cortisol or you have low cortisol due to chronic stress, the body is going to look at you as being in a survival strategy, like you're running from a tiger, for example. And if you're running from a tiger, your body doesn't care about your sex hormones, right? Because reproducing when the tiger's chasing you doesn't lead to survival. So the sex hormones take a back seat. So cortisol dysfunction promotes sex hormone dysfunction. Cortisol dysfunction promotes thyroid dysfunction, because if you're running from a tiger, again, making your metabolism a priority is not high on the list, because if you're dead in 15 minutes, why waste energy on metabolism? If your cortisol is high cortisol takes sugar that's stored in your muscles in your liver and dumps it in the bloodstream. So high cortisol actually increases blood sugar and can worsen the insulin resistance, and you can get a vicious cycle that way. And then high blood sugar has been shown in the research to increase gut permeability, or cause the gut to be hyperpermeable, or quote unquote leaky gut. So you can see how, stress and its impacts on cortisol can impact the entire tree or the entire root system and impact your ability to lose weight. So these are just a couple of the areas in your physiology where you could go deeper and investigate to understand, why can I not lose weight even though I'm nailing my nutrition and my exercise? A couple areas in your lifestyle that you could investigate would be, one would be sleep, right? So there's a moon. And so if you're not sleeping properly, whether it's quantity and or quality, then that's a major stressor. If you read the research on just one night of sleep deprivation, which poor sleep is defined by less than 6 hours. Okay. So say you only got 5 hours, or you're one of those people that's like, hey, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, you're making that day come faster if you're not sleeping. Okay. So sleep deprivation is a major stressor. The next day after one poor night of sleep, studies show that people are 30% more insulin resistant than normal. Okay, so it doesn't take long for poor sleep to catch up to you. And if you're someone who, does shift work and your circadian rhythm's totally flipped, there's lots of research on shift work and how bad it can be for global physiology. So look at your lifestyle too, especially your sleep and your sleep hygiene, to understand, hey, I'm exercising and eating right, but then I end up being a night owl and I'm on my devices way too late, right? Or I work third shift and I never see the sun, so my circadian rhythm's all messed up. So these are various areas to investigate to help answer the question, why can't I lose weight even though I'm nailing nutrition, nailing exercise? Let's open this up for questions.
What role does menopause play in all this? I mean, I'm at that age and kind of going through it now. And I feel like, I can get the scale to budge a pound or two, but I can't get it to go any further.
Yeah, good question. So menopause can play a significant role, and it's a role that, no one wants to hear, because so what's happening is in menopause, you have the shutting down of your ovaries, which, you know, we're providing your sex hormone production in addition to your adrenals. And so in menopause, we have the ovaries shutting down and the whole pretty much endocrine model of sex hormones shutting down. And now the adrenals and your fat tissue are tasked with producing your sex hormones for you. And so, you know, women might notice as they go through menopause, they've said to me before, I have this pouch that I've never had, right? Well, that pouch is a, you know, basically a fatty fanny pack. And the fat tissue in that fanny pack is helping produce the estrogen that your ovaries no longer are. And so on some level, that's a physiologic just changeover for hormone production for you. Now, of course, there's in America where 2/3 of people are overweight, probably there's some part of that fanny pack that is unnecessary. And so we can work to lose that, but postmenopausal, you may not have the as flat a tummy as you used to have, because that new tissue there is actually now your hormone, part of your hormone factory.
I had read an article, and I can't even cite where and when, that it was one doctor's opinion that it really during menopause that it's virtually impossible to lose weight because your body is trying to hold on to fat for that reason.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, or in theory, or would you disagree with that?
I think impossible is probably a strong word. And I think this goes to the case and the person in front of us, right? Because if we talk about, you know, you're familiar, Vicki, with a tool we have in the office called the InBody scanner. And that's looking at your body composition and how much of it is skeletal muscle mass, how much it is lean body mass made up as bone, muscle, and body water, how much of it is fat, which fat is divided up into subcutaneous fat, which we can define as like booty and breast, or visceral fat, which is the fat that's around our organs. And so the visceral fat is the metabolically unhealthy fat, and higher levels of visceral fat increase risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease and things of that nature. So, you know, if a person, again, if we're talking about the average American, which just for the purposes of this discussion, we should, the average American is overweight. Okay, 66% of Americans are overweight. So that's 66 is higher than 50, 50% would be average. So the average American is overweight. So I would argue the average American has weight to lose, you know, at any age of their life, pre-menopause, during perimenopause, post-menopause. So I think impossible is strong. I think it just, again, depends on the person, but most Americans are going to have visceral fat to lose. And we actually want to lose that because that's pro-inflammatory and metabolically unhealthy, and will work against, that will actually help promote hormone dysfunction. So it works against, you know, sailing to and through menopause safely, or smoothly, I should say.
Okay, I agree. I just I wanted to ask that question. I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely have weight to lose, and I'm due to talk to you soon. So, but
Yeah.
that I just wanted your opinion on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we had you know, I guess a third of Americans are not overweight. So if we talk about those women who go into menopause at an ideal weight, then that may be harder to lose weight, you know, because ideal weight, I guess we'd say ideal weight, body composition wise, and maybe from a healthcare perspective versus in that individual's psychology, right?
Yeah.
Different people have a different number for what ideal is for them. But if we went with a healthy weight from a body composition standard, that might be hard to lose, because they would be, you know, where we would want to see them ideally from a visceral fat level and a subcutaneous fat level.
I have a question. Can you define the different types of stress that can increase, that can contribute to the increased weight? I know there's perceived stress, my boss is driving me nuts.
Yep.
But what other types of stress can lead to, the cortisol levels and going up and not being able to lose weight?
Yeah, so good question. So a couple of things here. If we first look at stress, we want to understand that one, there's distress. And distress is, bad stress, right? It's whatever stresses you out as we commonly speak the word stress. So that could be boss, that could be finances, that could be spouse, toxic food, sedentary, whatever. Then there's eustress, and eustress is, good stress. So anything you like properly appropriate intensity and duration exercise, orgasm, food that you love to eat, going out on the lake, fun day with your family, like anything that's, a positive stressor. You get a promotion and you're like, yes, like that is stress too, but that's eustress, that's good stress, that's like endorphin stress, positive. So we're never going to be no stress, but if we can play with the ratio of distress to eustress, that's where we can really help ourselves or lose it, right? If we're in a tough spot in life where everything is distressful, that's where we need to work to find some eustress and also try and get out of the whole sympathetic nervous system as a whole into that parasympathetic side. So that's one thing. And then I guess you were asking, what are the distressors?
Yeah, because there's, like, if you have an illness or or you break your leg or other types of stressors than just perceived stress, infection and things like that actually put stress on your body.
Yeah. Infection is, trauma is, and that trauma can be physical, mental, emotional, chemical, finances, job, sleep deprivation.
I'm in a caregiving situation right now, and
Yes,
caregiving is
thank
extremely
you.
stressful.
Absolutely, caretaking. There's a lot of research on caretakers, and that they have it worse than the patients, especially if the patients are dementia, Alzheimer's. Patients that don't even realize they're so stressful for the caretakers. So absolutely, caretaking.
So even things like menopause, the
Parenting is
actual
caretaking.
physical.
Yeah, so there's physiologic stressors. Yep. Physiologic, I missed an O in there. Yep, physiologic stressors. Yeah, so these are, if you look at yourself as a bucket, right, and the more of these stressors you have in your bucket, you could say the higher your fluid level. And the higher your fluid level, especially if you start to spill over, right, and you start to be sitting in it, right, then we're in trouble, right? And so, most people are like, okay, I need to decrease stress, so I'll go exercise. Well, all right, maybe you cancel that one out and your fluid level drops this much, right? So it's like, oh, that didn't really help me. We need to go through and figure it out. Well, exercise needs to clean up. We need to knock out this infection. I need to sleep better. Maybe I ask a sibling or some other people for help with the caretaking. And so now when we combine those things, now we drop to like here. It's like, wow, that much change in stress was noticeable in my physiology, to my mental state, to everything. And so when you're not teetering all the time on spilling over, there's more margin, you could say, for physiology, or we're taking the foot off the brake in terms of the impact of cortisol and stress hormones on blocking things like sex hormones and thyroid that aren't crucial when we're in a survival mechanism. Does that make sense, Sue?
Yeah, because, some people say, oh, well, I'm not stressed. My job is great. My spouse is great. Yet they have all these, they don't think of what's going on inside their body that is stressful.
Yeah,
They just
absolutely.
think of the mental day to day, my money, my finances are good. And they don't realize that, indeed they are under a lot of stress because they have gut issues, they have immune issues, they have all this other stuff going on.
Yes, absolutely. And a great example of that, thank you. A great example of that is I made a video probably a month ago or so about heart disease risk. And, people think if they're skinny and have normal cholesterol and normal blood pressure, that they're not at risk of a heart attack. And so I showed you a case of a 30-something female that was skinny and has normal cholesterol, normal blood pressure. But when we dove into her labs, her C-reactive protein was lab high. Her homocysteine was like 5 times too high. And these are things that even though she feels fine, is metabolically breaking down her vascular system and stressing her out to the point of massively increased risk of a heart attack, right? And she might not know she was quote unquote stressed that way until the event happens, unless you work with a practitioner that finds that in her and helps explain, hey, awesome that you don't feel stressed, but your body is very stressed. So yeah, to your point, you can definitely be stressed and not feel stressed. And that's why things like labs and diagnostics to look under the hood is good. And that's why our whole kind of societal mantra of I feel good, therefore I'm healthy. That's why we have a lot of people saying, well, he was so healthy, how did he have a heart attack? It's like, he wasn't healthy. Can't judge the book by the cover all the time. So it's helpful to have diagnostics, and for the people who look healthy, feel healthy, and then we run the testing and they are healthy, then awesome. Keep doing it. Good questions. Anything else?
I have to piggyback on that caregiving. That is probably one of the number one stressors in my opinion, because like I was a caregiver from 2010 till last year when my sister passed away, with my mother and father and mother-in-law and father-in-law, and then my sister. So I totally get that. And I am having trouble at this point coming down from all of that. And so that's one of the reasons why that I really feel like this program is going to be good for me, because I am trying to de-stress from all of that. But it's not easy to do once you've been stressed for so long and working a full-time job and trying to do all of these things, and a grandkid going through a lot of things, as you well know. I have been extremely stressed, but the caregiving is, that is such a good point. And I noticed that I've had heart skips. I've had different things that's happened to me very recently. And I just, I'm having a hard time getting myself out of that caregiving mode that I've been in for so long.
Yeah. And so thank you for sharing. And here's kind of the next level of that. If I need to make some space over here. So I'm going to get rid of our moon and this stuff here real quick. So let's go here. And so thank you. That was Libby, right? I think that was Libby speaking.
Yes.
Yeah. Get it, John, to get the voice. Yeah, so if we talk about stress, right, you might read about stress on blogs and see it related to what's called the HPA axis. Okay, and here's some nerdy stuff real quick, but it'll make sense in a minute. So the H stands for hypothalamus, and that's a part of the brain. Okay, that's the thermostat, we'll call it, in the brain. Okay, the P is pituitary, and so that's another part of the brain here. We'll draw it large so you can see it. And then the A is the adrenals. So on your kidney has a hat on it, and that hat is the adrenal gland, or the Hershey kiss. In this picture, kind of looks like it. Okay, so you have a H talks to P, talks to A axis. And what happens is when P talks to A produces cortisol. Okay, and then so this is the endocrine system, or the hormonal system. And when A produces cortisol, we've got cortisol in the system, and then it goes, the brain, the thermostat is sensing how much hormone, how much cortisol in this case is in the system, and based on that system feedback, the thermostat will turn up or down its message to the pituitary, telling the adrenals to make more or less cortisol. Does that make sense? So it's a negative feedback. If we've got a lot out in the system, we'll stop telling it to make so much because we don't need more currently. Or if we don't have enough in the system, the brain will tell the adrenals make more to help you adapt. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Enough
Sure.
sense. So it's kind of like if your kids aren't being loud, you don't yell at them to be quiet. But if they are loud, you yell them to be quiet, or at least I do. Okay, so it's kind of like how the hormone system works. If you're producing just enough, it's a nice smooth cycle. If you're producing too much or yelling, if the adrenals are yelling too much with cortisol, the brain will say, hey, quiet down. Or if there's not enough around, the brain will say, hey, make more. So I want you to understand that a little bit, but if you don't, it's okay. The point is the brain is involved, and the brain learns through repetition, right? It's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, which basically means neurons that fire together, wire together. So metaphorically, I talk about it in my book, is if you have a grass field and you take a four-wheeler and you just drive over that grass field one time, that day we could probably see the tracks where your four-wheeler drove, but by the next day or two, the grass bends back up and it's good to go. We can't see you were ever there. But if every single day you drive over the same path in that grass, eventually you're going to wear the grass away and maybe even make ruts. So we know, hey, this is the exact path they take every single day, right? Right or wrong, that's your path. Well, neuroplasticity does that same thing. So if you're caretaking for 10 years, and that 10 years is you're just hammering, make more, dumping it, right? More. And what you're making is the thing that is the stress hormone. So it's making you alert. It's keeping you alive basically, and keeping you ramped up and able to push through and help these people in your family because no one else is there to help you help them. And then that season is over. Well, first of all, cortisol and the stress response helps you be resilient and make it through. But oftentimes the caretakers, once that demand on them is gone, that's when they fall apart, right? It's like, wow, she's so strong. For 10 years, she's been taking care of these people, never been sick, never missed a day. And then now that situation has changed, the caretaking is no longer needed for whatever reason. And now that person falls apart. Okay, sick, chronic pain, maybe new diagnoses or whatever. It's because the resilience, she was resilient, he or she was resilient and able to get through that, but then so the cortisol, broke them down that way. But then now they continue to be anxious or continue to have, this happens a lot in PTSD cases as well, as it continues even though the trigger's gone. So we see this a lot in soldiers who come back and say they were, in Afghanistan, and in Afghanistan, during the day, it was pretty calm. They don't have to do anything. It's not until about 6 p.m. sun goes down, they start cleaning their guns. They're ramping up to go out and do their stuff. And so, when you're cleaning your gun and going out and you don't know, is this my last day on earth? And you're about to go into, a real gunfight, you're going to ramp up cortisol and adrenaline and all that stress chemistry. And you're not going to sleep because you need to be awake to defend yourself. Well, then they finish their tour. Thankfully, they survive. They come home and now they can't sleep and they're up all hours of the night, right? And they have PTSD and things of that nature. Well, why? Because of the neuroplasticity. The brain had learned, they created those deep ruts that the brain and their physiology learned, hey, it's 6 p.m., time to clean your guns. And he hasn't cleaned a gun in months, but the physiology is trained that way at this point, time to clean your guns and defend yourself. Okay, so in the same way, a caretaker who for 10 years has been, redlining and cortisol to take care of everyone else, now they actually don't need to anymore, and they have margin in their life to calm down, but the brain has learned, no, this is your default. So it's going to take time to create new ruts, right? So now you're like, hey, I want to calm down. And so I'm going to do some meditation and I'm going to do some deep breathing and I'm going to do some, dog petting and book reading and stuff like that. So you do it for a couple days and you feel a little better. Cool. But then you stop because, you might think the nutrition made you feel better or something. So you drive a path for 3 days and then fall back into the old rut. No one's going to know that you drove a separate path after a couple of days, right? So for people to know you're on a different path, you have to be on that path consistently. And that's why, hey, for at least 90 days, let's build this path, let's build momentum, let's drive new ruts, hopefully, that your default path is this new one, right? Which opposes the one that you walked into my office with. Does that make sense?
Yes, I really hadn't thought about the PTSD factor. I've been like almost to tears, and I've been wondering what is wrong with me because I have been, my burden has lifted, even though I work with kids with behavior problems that can be stressful. I've had a couple of episodes just within the last month that I've just wondered what in the world is happening to me, because everything should be much better now that I'm not losing all the sleep that I was losing. Going, following the path to Kentucky every other weekend and being there weeks at a time. And so, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't, a lot of doctors don't. And it's, we want to snap. We think we should just be able to snap back. And it'd be great if we could, but that's a long-term, that's a long-term, essentially a long-term habit that you ingrained. And so it's going to take, essentially, you could look at it as training to change it, right? You need a new habit, a new behavior. And so the things you're implementing are targeted to get you there. And, there's no substitute in this case, if we're trying to create new plasticity or new connections, there's no substitute for time. Like we have to do it, disciplined, consistently, correctly over time. Because you were, whether you were consciously or not, being disciplined in your cortisol over time as a caretaker, it had that effect.